I want another drink. We're recording. Sorry. So we're on to season 3, I believe now. So, when season 2 left off, we left the players in Constantinople. So really, what's sort of the purpose of season 2 was really they were kind of sick of being neonates, getting ordered around and then sent on suicide missions, and just life being generally extremely shitty. And anyone who's played a Vampire the Masquerade game knows that's just how it goes for neonates. Your life sucks. So, with the season 2, they really wanted to carve out their own territory, and they thought a crusade would do that. They thought it would do it in the Holy Land and not in Constantinople, but they tried to make the best of things. Really, during the downtime, they were just essentially establishing their positions in Constantinople and really just trying to make themselves, give themselves their own power base, because they were sick of being told what to do by their sires. So really, they still admitted that they were going to get dicked over by any elder vampire who came along, but they were determined that they were going to make the elder vampire ask politely before he dicked them over. So, the same thing really holds true here in Season 3, because they had carved out their own power bases, but their own power bases really kind of sucked in Constantinople. They didn't have that much going on. Basically what happens is all the players are called to a party that is being thrown by a Ventru lord named Jurgen. So what's been going on is the other thing they wanted to do is they really were trying, because they were trying to distance themselves from their sires, they were also really kind of distancing themselves from the Eastern European Tzimisce in general, because they were also pretty scared of Yorick. So they were just really trying to make their own way as sort of a neutral party. They didn't want to get caught up in the politics, because they had already did their time in the Tremere-Tzimisce War. So their efforts did succeed somewhat, so they were invited as a neutral representative from Constantinople to the party of Jurgen, who announced his intention to invade the Tzimisce lands in Eastern Europe and to Christianize them. Basically what's happening in history at this point is that the Teutonic Knights have been invited into Hungary to go and Christianize the land. Basically, they're going to go and just kill a bunch of pagans. Jurgen is going to use this as sort of a cover. He also makes a claim of kind of Christianizing the land, but really he just wants to go and steal land, which is, I guess more profitable, but it's not really something you can just announce. The party does not go well. There are some various misadventures that happen, but they're not overall that important. Point is, the players manage to solve the problems for Jurgen, and they kind of get in good with him. So, at the same time, they're also trying to get in, they already have some boons owed to them by the Tzimisce from their role against the Tremere, so they're really just trying to set themselves up as someone that both sides are kind of counting on, because they figure that's going to place them in a good position to kind of turn tides one way or the other. The other thing that happened very early in the game was they had they had helped to establish a blacksmith guild. They were really trying to, they were investing money in blacksmiths very early on in the game. I didn't mention it because it wasn't really important until now, but at this point they actually had quite a few blacksmiths under their control. They had, access to some metals and things like that. So they came up with the brilliant idea of selling weapons to both sides of the conflict, because they knew a war was coming, so they essentially became war profiteers, and as the Cold War was sort of building up, they just started selling weapons to both sides. And Mary, since she was playing a mage, was trying to do some minor enchantments and things like that on them. So they made I won't lie to you, they made a bundle of money over the course of this. Their resources went, through the roof. But, really they just wanted to set themselves up as neutral just so that because both of them were powerful enough that either side could just crush them, really, at a moment's notice, but they just wanted to make themselves so important that they were kind of indispensable to both groups. So that was the story for the first part of the season, and then the war just started heating up, and the Ventru looked to have the advantage, and so, out of character, the players were kind of planning on going Sabbat, so they weren't really sure how to feel about helping the Ventru against the Tzimisce, but in character they were still making a lot of money, so they just kind of put their feelings aside. The next major thing that happens, since they are important enough that they weren't really taking place in the day-to-day fighting, is that at this point the Fifth Crusade begins, and so they wanted to try and take advantage of that, because they had been sort of building up a mercenary force of their own for some time. In addition to investing in the blacksmiths, the other thing they invested as much money as they could in was building up a mercenary force. So they decided this would be a good opportunity to go there and steal even more loot. Once again, this is one of the hard things about running a story like within an actual history, is out of character. They kind of know what's going on. You know, not sure how to play this. I guess if you're gonna run a Vampire the Dark Ages game, make sure your players are uneducated. I don't want to say just dumb, but if you're playing with history buffs, they'll immediately go, oh, the Fifth Crusade, that's going to go to Egypt and then fail because they refuse to deal with the Muslims early, which kind of can be a problem when you're obviously in character. None of your guys know that. But these guys hopped on the Crusade bandwagon and headed down to Egypt. And while they were in Acre, Acre, for those of you who don't know, is kind of a holy city, and in the world of darkness, it's been blocked off to all vampires for a long time. And it's been kind of presumed that it's because the true cross is somewhere hidden inside of Acre. But during the Fifth Crusade, the shield suddenly goes down, and anyone can go into Acre. At this point, the players immediately start trying to carve out their own territory in Acre, as well as look for the true cross itself. It is during this adventure that they first meet the character of Jan, who was introduced quite a while ago to you guys. This is when I met up with Stallworth again. We'd been friends for a while, but we hadn't talked to each other. And when we did, I mentioned that we were playing a Vampire the Masquerade game, and he asked to join. So he rolled up Jan, and he kind of joined the players on their search for the true cross. He had hooked up with a contingent of Germanic peoples heading into the Holy Land. And when he arrived, he met Dragomir first, and the two of them went off on their own to seek out the true cross, which they did eventually find, although they found it in the possession of Gauthier de Dampierre, who I mentioned earlier. He's a hunter who kind of just kept turning up to make their lives miserable, and so they were not pleased to see him in possession of the true cross. In the end, he ends up pretty much cornered. The players do manage to corner him, so rather than let the true cross be taken by heathens, he sets himself and the true cross on fire. Mary gets the brilliant idea to try and just shoot as much prime energy as she can into him, and the whole thing just explodes, and the cross ascends into heaven out of their reach. So no one was really pleased with that result, but you gotta figure, anyone who has any experience dungeon mastering or anything like that knows you can't let the players get something as powerful as the true cross. That's just out of the question. So, while they were there, they carved out territory in Acre, and from there on, they tried to get themselves as much power as they could within the crusading army. Svezdan began attempting to blood bond people. Jan did that as well, as many of the commanders as they could. They had a fairly sizable mercenary force already within the group. And at that point, Svezdan, who had been steadily working his way up the ranks of the church, he had been integral in setting up the first substantial Catholic presence in Constantinople, and his sire had arranged for him to be made a bishop. So he took the opportunity to turn their mercenary force into a crusading order, which he and Dragomir dubbed the Order of St. Moses the Black. Those of you Catholics out there could probably tell who St. Moses the Black is. I think what happened was we just looked through names of saints, found one with a really cool name, Moses the Black, and just picked that. As I recall, David had said something about how there was someone with like a really cool name about the Black, and since he was a La Sombra, he really wanted that guy to be their patron. So they took the opportunity to try and influence the crusade as much as possible. While there, this was, they claim they had in-character reasons, but it was pretty out of character, really. They eventually ended up they hired Assamites to assassinate the leaders of the crusade who disagreed with their position that they should just try and trade Egypt as quickly as possible. Because, you can look this up yourself, but the crusade does manage to take a hold of, a substantial part of Egypt. They're moving into Cairo when the army just gets surrounded and wiped out, and they just generally have a bad time. The Assamites obviously wanted to just get the crusading army out of there. So they agreed to help the players due to a bit of clever negotiating on their part, and they convinced the rest of the crusading commanders to trade Egypt for Jerusalem. So this is the first major world event that they actually influenced. The Fifth Crusade in our storyline was actually a mild success. It did end with the return of Jerusalem, and with the rebuilding of many of its fortifications. They wanted to check out the spoils of victory, so they headed to Jerusalem, where they discovered that there were various strange madmen being sighted, and they presumed it had something to do with Malkavians. So, investigating, they discovered that apparently Malkov was resting somewhere beneath Jerusalem, which was big news, because this was the first antediluvian they actually encountered. Investigating further, they found out that somehow his psyche had been split between several madmen, and they ended up they consulted with the various important people there, a very powerful, somewhat immortal magus, and they managed to supernaturally heal Malkov's psyche and sort of put him back to bed, because when antediluvians wake up, no one's happy. With the city somewhat safe and finally sort of secure, they once again tried to set up business relations in Jerusalem. And this sort of became the story of all of our later adventures, as they really just wanted to get to a city and then just set up as many businesses as they could there. They really jumped on the whole merchant class thing well before actual history does. Another sort of out-of-character thing, I guess. But to be fair, Zvezdan the Churchman, Catholic Church was already fairly greedy at this point, so I don't necessarily have a problem with him being primarily concerned with getting more money. With that done, they headed back to their home in Constantinople and just kind of watched the war between the Ventru and the Tzimisce mature. And eventually, after various other mild adventures, the war came to a head, where the Teutonic Knights in the real world, King of Hungary told them to get out of his territory because they were basically setting up their own state within Hungary, and he didn't like that. So the Ventru really need to hurry up their plans to take on the Tzimisce, and at this point, both sides kind of figure out that the players are working both sides against the middle and basically tell them that they have to make a choice which one they're going with. So the players find out about a plot for Jurgen to try and take advantage of Vladimir Rustovich, who is the Tzimisce war commander. He's going to do some kind of ritual. They never really figured out what it was, but they're like, we need to stop it. Because they were sent to go procure an item, like a package from a Tremere, and they just assumed it was going to be used in something bad. So they just got rid of the package, faked another one, and just tried to deliver it, which didn't work because they just got another package that kind of looked the same, but nothing inside was actually what was supposed to be delivered. Dragomir desperately tried to buy them time by just infusing as much quintessence into the package as possible to pretend it was magical, but they ended up just locked in a dungeon. Fortunately, before they were locked up, they did manage to send a message to the Tzimisce to, where they were, what was going on, some basics, I think, of the fortifications, and just to come help immediately. And they did, so the players did manage to hold out, because eventually Jurgen just got sick of them. He was just pretty much going to go in there and have them executed. They came up with a brilliant idea of just fortifying themselves inside the room where they were locked, because the Salubri have a special ability, which I have not mentioned up until now. In their Obeah discipline, one of the powers is that you can create a psychic shield that people just can't enter. They have to do a contested willpower roll. And Miles min-maxed the hell out of his character to get he got 10 points of willpower. So, basically, whenever shit goes down, the party has one plan. And I believe they ended up nicknaming it Plan Bubble, or the Bubble Plan. Alternatively, occasionally known as Plan B, for Bubble. Which is, throw up the bubble, have Jan the Toreador use Majesty, and everyone else just raise as much hell as possible while staying inside the bubble, and just hope to escape in the chaos. So that was the plan here. They just barricaded themselves inside of the fortress with the bubble, and just anyone who did manage to get through, they just, like, immediately try and cut them down, and they just try to stay out of the way of any projectiles thrown in. Eventually, there are a lot of problems with the bubble plane, and I came up with several flaws I was going to exploit, but, fortunately, they did manage to get a message off to the Tzimisce, as I said before, so they were rescued. Basically, I was just going to have them, Jurgen, set a fire underneath the room they were in and just burn them out, which, they were not prepared for. So yeah, the war, pretty much everyone is killing everyone, and then the Gangrel show up, because throughout the whole war, the Gangrel have just kind of been victims of both sides, and so they got pissed, and so they just attacked both sides at once. At this point, Micah Vikos shows up, and announces that the Draken demands that a peace settlement be reached. I forgot to mention this in Season 2, but basically Constantinople was ruled by 3 Methuselah. There was Michael, who I mentioned, the lover that Zvezdan reminded him of, that was a Ventru Methuselah, who's dead. And then there was the Draken, another Tzimisce Methuselah. And the players have kind of been working with Micah, so they'd kind of been working for the Draken. Mary started coming up with wild theories about how Micah was the Draken. So he basically announces that the Draken is just fed up with their shit, and that they need to reach a peace agreement. And so he kind of takes advantage of the fact that all 3 armies have wiped themselves out. And so with the players, he kind of announces the creation of a neutral zone, which the Obertus monks from Constantinople would control most of, like 90-95% of, and then the players' coterie would control the last part of, around the city of Balgrad, which, as I mentioned before, Dragomir's family owned. So Micah sort of announces that every other major male family member of Dragomir's has been killed, and so he just immediately, essentially, inherits a city. So it's kind of presumed that the Draken may have arranged that. So, at this point, both sides are really forced to agree to this, and the war just kind of ends, and everyone goes off to lick their wounds. Everyone moves to Balgrad at this point to kind of set themselves up there. Zvezdan declares himself Prince of the City. Everyone just kind of settles down in Balgrad for a couple of years, and that's really where Season 3 ends. The other major development is that Zvezdan does track down a child at this point and embraces him, and he leaves him in Constantinople as his replacement seneschal, because he wanted to maintain ties in Constantinople. Other than that, Gabriel really continues to try and pursue Ariane, who continues to not really be interested. During Season 3, I believe, is the time period where he created a statue in her honor, and she didn't really go for it. So, that was going on. Other than that, not much happened. Joshua's his character, continued to try and study medicine and set up a hospital in Balgrad. Zvezdan continued to study abyss mysticism, Dragomir continued to study magic, and things just kind of went on from there. So, now it's the time for the reviews. And this has already gone on for a little while, and it's going to go on for a while longer because I got a lot of reviews to do. So, the first thing got a review is Under the Black Cross. This is another adventure, official adventure, and this is the one I'm going to really gush over. I really love this book. It's really cool in my opinion. Better than Bitter Crusade. It's very similar to Bitter Crusade, it just in how it works. It takes place over a course of years. There are 3 stories that all tie together in one big chronicle. And in this case, I think it's even better than Bitter Crusade because there's no real weak link in this one, actually, in my opinion. All 3 of the stories are pretty interesting. Also, it deals a little bit more with vampire matters, less with the mortal stuff, because even with Bitter Crusade, the way it's written, they kind of assume your players aren't gonna, dick around with real-world events. And, for my chronicle, I threw that out, but still, the way it's written, the mortals of the Fourth Crusade kind of pick their own direction. The players don't have that much input. But this one deals more with purely Cainite matters, more purely vampire stuff, so I think the players have a little bit more control. The story does kind of a little bit more heavily focus on Jurgen. You're kind of supposed to be siding with the Ventru, but it does give some options to side with the Tzimisce. That's the reoccurring problem in every Vampire the Masquerade book that's official adventure that's ever been released, is that you're supposed to be playing as Camarilla characters. You're supposed to be siding with the Ventrue. They're usually pretty good about having an option for Sabbat characters, but it's never quite as fully fleshed out. And as someone who tends to prefer Sabbat characters, I don't care much for it. The right kind of Sabbat characters, that is. The Sabbat are a lot like Malkavians in that you have to play them correctly. Don't just be an asshole about it, which a lot of people never really get right. But I really like the adventure. It starts out sort of with, just vampire parties, which is always a good starting point for adventures. You get to meet some important movers and shakers. Jurgen is a pretty important character. Then the next adventure takes place in the Holy Land, part of the Fifth Crusade, and I like kind of interweaving the Crusades as part of these first couple seasons. So that was really good. And then it comes back towards the end of the war, and it gives kind of an adventure for the final encounter. They didn't really follow the adventure so much because they were clearly siding with the Tzimisce, and they kind of, they made some interesting choices during that adventure. They did manage to pull it out. I mean, they survived, barely. But, yeah, there was a lot of lucky rolls involved in that. So I really like it. It also gives you a lot of ideas for stuff to run in the middle to kind of make the war come home a lot. So, honestly, I really would like the idea of maybe running it again with other characters that are just directly tied with Jurgen, kind of like, it's very good for, like, sort of Road of Chivalry characters, like Bruja or Ventrue, who are really, like, knightly sort of people as sort of vassals to Jurgen. I think that'd be a really interesting way to do it, and kind of fighting off monstrous Tzimisce creatures. If that wasn't the way I worked it in, this party just wouldn't have really gone for that. It just wouldn't have made sense, but really, this is probably, if you're going to run an adventure in the Dark Ages, I suggest this one, honestly. It's my personal favorite, so take from that what you will. Other adventures I ran, since the second adventure of Under the Black Cross took place in Acre, I took the opportunity to do some stuff in Jerusalem, too. So, this is where it gets a little bit less glowing. So, there is a small adventure, Fountains of Bright Crimson. That's a just one-story adventure set in Jerusalem, and then there's also Jerusalem by Night. These are packaged separately, and I have no idea why. That's probably my biggest problem with these two things. I read somewhere that Fountains of Bright Crimson was originally supposed to be packaged with Jerusalem by Night, but they ran out of room. Really, it's not that long. You could have just made a slightly larger book. Really, it just comes down to that's my biggest problem with it. The adventure itself, Fountains of Bright Crimson, it's sort of interesting. It deals with Malkov. There's some cool stuff going on. I always like anything that involves the antediluvians. There's some Bali in there for good measure. Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. It's just really not worth buying it on your own, especially because you're not going to find this in any bookstores nowadays. The only way you're going to get it is by ordering it online, and that means you're going to have to pay the price for it, then you're going to have to pay the price for the additional shipping and handling. And even then, it really doesn't make sense unless you also get Jerusalem by Night. So you have to pay for that, then you have to pay for that to be shipped separately, and it's really just an added bother that you don't need. Jerusalem by Night, it's really just a city source book. It's really just sort of average, in my opinion. I think maybe it would have been better if they had dealt with the Holy Land in general, rather than just Jerusalem. This many vampires being in Jerusalem really doesn't make that much sense, considering there aren't that many people there. Constantinople by Night is really the only city sourcebook that makes sense in the Dark Ages, because even in the Dark Ages it has like 1 million people. I don't remember what the actual number of people in Jerusalem were, but there are like 30 vampires there, and there aren't really enough people to support that number. So, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, really, you're just walking through Jerusalem, and like half the people you meet are probably vampires. So, that's kind of silly. Really, if these had been combined together in one package for the same price, I would say I would give it probably an above average, mildly above average rating. Really, the fact that you're going to have to track them down separately is really what puts this into my below average category. I really just don't see any reason to buy Jerusalem by Night alone. If you're going to buy Fountains of Bright Crimson, you really need Jerusalem by Night to go with it, to kind of explain the city and stuff like that. Really, I guess if you really want to do something in Jerusalem, I would suggest buying them together. If that seems like too much trouble or too much money or whatever, just make up your own stuff. really. This is not worth it, in my opinion. So, that's that for this season and my reviews here. So, there's only one more season. My glass of rum and coke is running down, so we'll see you back in that video and finish up this introduction. So, I will see you guys later.